Hello, this is Mayor Chris Bollwage. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Our City. And if any residents are looking for any information, you can go to our social media accounts for any upcoming events, or simply if you have a question, or you can call our public information office for follow-up at 908-820-4124. I hope everyone's enjoying the summer. I know it's hot, climate change, and here today, we're talking with Tyler Taba, who is the Director of Resilience and the Waterfront Alliance. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great to be here.
Now, you've been on before. Tell me a little bit about yourself
Sure.
and what you've been up to.
Yeah, I've been here one time before, so second time on the show. Thanks for having me back. Must have done a decent job to come back.
So it's because I like your hair. You have a lot more of it than I do, you see.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, well, it's great to be back. So for everybody to know, my name is Tyler Taba. I'm the Director of Resilience at the Waterfront Alliance. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the son of two Iranian immigrants. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I studied nonprofit business and environmental science in undergrad and sustainability management in graduate school. So I have an environmental background, and I know we're going to get to some of the work stuff here in a bit, but just some personal tidbits about me. I'm really into cycling. I'm a backpacker. Like to go camping, public parks and public spaces, and basically spent my entire adult life reading nonfiction. And I've been so overwhelmed by everything going on in the world that I'm taking a break this year, and I'm reading only fiction. So if you have any good fiction recommendations for me, I'm taking notes and have a good list going.
What made you go? Were you born here?
I wasn't. I was actually born in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, but I moved here about 7-8 years ago.
What made you go in this direction, this area of study? Because Dallas, Texas, and here, two different needs for climate issues and water resiliency. So
yeah, absolutely.
How'd you get there?
That's a good question. Yeah, I thought about that a lot. You know, there's obviously climate risks in Texas, and Hurricane Beryl just made landfall a couple of weeks ago down in Houston in the area. But you're right, Texas or the Dallas in particular is not really affected by sea level rise and climate change in the way that the Northeast is. But I studied environmental science because I've always liked being in the outdoors, and it was kind of a natural segue for me to think about the environment and nature. And then when I moved to New York for graduate school to study sustainability management, that's when I really started becoming familiar with the concepts of water. And there's this really interesting spectrum, I think, with water, where you have places where there's not enough water, and there's drought is the biggest climate risk there. Right. But then you have places like in the Northeast and where we are in particular, where there's almost an abundance of water. There's too much water. And so this broad spectrum of what do you do to manage water always interested me. And so I really got interested in the resiliency and adaptation side of it, and how do we learn to live with the water. I think that's a really interesting concept.
Do you think those people with more water should give it to those?
Not necessarily. In some cases, I think the too much water is, as we've seen, can be dangerous, right? And you can have the same thing on the other side.
Just going internationally, if you go back to your culture, that's the big issue out there, no matter how you look at it.
That's right.
It's water rights, right?
It's 100% right.
So it's just, people who manage water is really a challenge.
It is a big challenge, yeah.
And Texas has less of it than we do.
Yeah, that's right.
The Waterfront Alliance, what exactly is it? If you can explain to our viewers.
Totally.
And then your role.
Absolutely.
More specifically.
Absolutely. So the Waterfront Alliance is a 17-year-old nonprofit organization. We're a regional organization, so bi-state focused, New York and New Jersey. Somewhat expanding nationally now through our Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines program, which I'm happy to talk about in a moment. But we are a nonprofit advocacy organization where climate resilience, I think, is really the through line of all of our work. We're an advocacy group focused on public access to the waterfront, so getting people out and thinking about the water and realizing that many of our communities in New York and New Jersey are waterfront communities, including Elizabeth. We also have a really great youth-based education program called Estuary Explorers, where we actually take students in high school out to their local waterfront so they can see what the water is like and actually learn about the impacts of climate change, because ultimately young people are the ones who are going to have to deal with this issue, and the best way is to actually get people aware of what the challenges are from a climate standpoint, so they can be the next advocate, the next mayor, the next planner, the next engineer, right, and be a part of the
Slow down
solution.
on the next mayor. I don't know you that well. Take it easy,
No. And then we of course we have our Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines program, and that's a rating system for developing along the waterfront. So public parks, multifamily homes, industrial sites, those can all go through these ratings and really are a way to serve as a resilient and ecological and a publicly accessible waterfront. So thinking about what are the new projects that we want along our waterfront, how do we want them to look, and how can we maximize community benefits for those places. And then lastly, my role is on the policy and on the public policy and planning side of things. So I help Waterfront Alliance advocate for legislation and planning around climate resilience and adaptation to make sure that our cities, our states are ready and equipped to handle these climate impacts that we're experiencing already in some cases.
So tell me, the 17th Annual Regional City of Water Day, what is it about first?
Yeah, great question.
And how did it begin?
Yeah, good question. So City of Water Day just happened on Saturday, July 13th. This is an annual event that happens every summer, and it's really a celebration. It's a celebration of the water. It's an event where we work with the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, and we actually solicit funding out to many local community organizations to host events all over the region across the water. So Elizabeth has been a long partner in City of Water Day, but you can think of really any parts of New York and New Jersey along the waterfront having events all the way from kayaking, festivals, educational materials and video screenings.
Do you do that? Do you get on kayaking?
I do get on kayaks. There's some places where it's safe and there's some places where it's not safe.
You wouldn't do that in the Arthur Kill?
I wouldn't do that in the Arthur Kill. Yeah, I think maybe where there's all those ships and containers, maybe not the best place to be kayaking, but there's certainly lots of local boathouse schools. There are places in the Hudson. Little coves, I think, where it's kind of secluded, where you can. Hoboken has a really great boathouse that they do some kayaking, but again, in a protected area, volunteer-led. I wouldn't recommend if you don't have kayaking experience, just take your kayak out and go into the Hudson. But there's definitely lots of great boathouse groups that are there. And so, yeah, City of Water Day is just a way that we like to get the word out that we're a waterfront, we're a region with waterfront, and people should know about it.
So Tyler, how many people pay attention to that day?
Well, this year we had over 75 events across the region, which was really, really fantastic. I was down out in Gowanus and Red Hook and Brooklyn, but there was events happening in Hackensack, in Elizabeth, like I said, in Hoboken. So the reach is pretty broad.
Is this regional or is this national too, or no?
It's regional right now, but maybe one day we'll get it all the way up the East Coast. But right now it's just regional.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's evolved into 75 events.
75 events, that's right. Yeah, and so one of the partners for City of Water Day is based here in Elizabeth, Future City Inc. And I know that you were a part of the video recording for that event, so thank you so much for doing that. It's been great to partner with all these really great local organizations who have their own community and their own constituency, and really seeing the way that they share their story about what it's like to live on the water. Living with water in Elizabeth is probably different than living with water even in Newark. It's definitely different than in the Rockaways in New York, and so everybody has that kind of special connection to the water, and so I think that's what makes City of Water Day so important.
So you're a pretty young guy. Do you see yourself staying in this type of field for? I mean, are you that driven by it, Tyler?
I am. I really am, yeah. I have been really fortunate to be at Waterfront Alliance for 3 years. Before that, I was working at the National Parks Conservation Association, a little more focused on the conservation side of the environmental movement. And before that, I was interning at the Parks Department in New York City. And so I've always had this draw to service and to the climate. And like I said, you said I'm a young person. I think our generation is going to be the one that has to deal with a lot of the impacts of climate change, and that's
true.
And I see a real opportunity
Our generation's messed it up.
Yeah, well, there's people
before us.
Exactly, and there's people who are doing a really good job of trying to rewrite some of that. But I think, I see myself staying here and trying to be part of the solution.
So your message to an audience regarding climate change as a whole, you've kind of spoken about it. Any way to refine it,
Yeah.
All I could do as a mayor, maybe change the fleet of cars slowly, right? But it's more expensive. Plant trees.
Sure. Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. Well, I'll say one thing that I saw actually over the weekend, I think, or late last week from your social media, is you were reposting on your Instagram stories some photos of resources for extreme heat. And I thought that was amazing. So thank you for doing that. That's really great. And I think one thing that I would say encourage people in the audience and who are listening to consider is that So there's things that we can do on a big scale with respect to climate change. There's infrastructure solutions that we can be advocating for. There's bills and legislation that we can be advocating for. But there's also a lot that you can do as an everyday resident right now, and that's to be prepared. Not to wait too long for the impacts of something to happen, but to know what your evacuation route is, to have a go bag ready to go, to sign up for alerts from the city or from the state to know when a storm might be coming or when there may be extreme heat. And so the little things, even just sharing on your social media, that's reaching a lot of people. And so,
we talk about bags to go and exit routes. Even though they exist, people don't pay attention.
Yeah.
They never think it's gonna. I mean, I've been in Key West. Have you ever been in Key West?
I haven't, no.
So there's evacuation routes, but there's only one way out.
Yeah.
It's only one way out of Key
Yeah.
West.
Yeah.
So, getting people out in a big effort is always difficult. And
It is.
unfortunately, most people don't even pay attention
I know.
until it's too late.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a challenge for sure. It's knowing how to reach people and just keeping the word out there. But I think one thing that we've been really trying to do is understand how to connect climate change to people's everyday lives. And I think that's the beauty of climate resilience, is that you can connect it. Resilience is not, it doesn't have to only be about climate. It's that you can think about it. We want to be economically resilient, right? We want to be socially as individuals resilient. And so thinking about how climate change intersects with problems with housing and the economy and jobs, and making it not just an isolated thing by itself, but connecting all these kind of issues together. But I did realize that, you asked me what with respect to climate change, and I maybe didn't answer what the kind of big climate impacts are. And so, I mean, I think people probably have a good sense, but one thing that maybe is worth noting, particular to New Jersey, is there's this flooding that's becoming more and more common in New Jersey, and you're seeing it from the inland flooding and the rain-based flooding, but also from coastal flooding, sea level rise, storm surge. This year is supposed to be a highly active hurricane season, and we already saw one. Exactly, Hurricane Beryl, and the remnants of that were supposed to come up and drop some rain over here, and fortunately it wasn't too bad, but it did
missed us.
It did rain, yeah.
It did flood in Vermont.
Yeah, that's right.
That storm.
Yeah, and so these are the kind of things that I think we can start to see happening more and more. And so that, I think, goes back to the messaging around being prepared and doing it really early so people aren't caught off guard when those things do happen.
What is the Rise to Resilience Coalition?
Yeah.
Why was it formed?
Yeah, so Rise to Resilience is a coalition that Waterfront Alliance launched back in 2019. And it was a time when we really were thinking about the lack of conversation around resiliency and adaptation in the climate space. I think you probably hear this a lot too. And when we're thinking about climate, there's a big focus on decarbonizing and renewable energy, right, which is extremely important.
We all hear that.
Of course. Energy efficiency within your buildings, reducing your water use. But resilience and adaptation is this kind of other side of the puzzle, which is, what does it look like to live in a climate changed world? What are the things that we can do to adapt, and what are the things that we can do to live with those changes? Because ultimately some of those impacts are going to persist whether we decarbonize yesterday or tomorrow or not. And so the coalition launched as a way to make climate resilience a more urgent policy priority. And so we've been doing a lot to try to make that case in New Jersey and in New York. And I think we can talk a little bit more about what some of the actions.
Who's involved in that?
Yeah, so it's about 100 organizations across New York and New Jersey, and not just environmental organizations. It's groups that are focused on housing, on labor. There's academia, Rutgers and Columbia are involved. We have leaders in environmental justice. So really trying to bring together all these different stakeholders to make the case that resilience is not just an environmental person thing, right? It affects all of us in some way. And so in New Jersey, we have Future City Inc., like I mentioned, based here in Elizabeth, the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, Hackensack Riverkeeper, Regional Plan Association, and then lots of other organizations across the Hudson over in New York. And so, we've tried to pass some good legislation. The New Jersey Flood Risk Disclosure Law that went into effect earlier this year, that was as a result of the advocacy of the Rise to Resilience Coalition. So we're starting to make some good headways, and I think hopefully there's a lot more to come.
So it started in 2019. Clearly you're aggressive. The organization's aggressive. How do you sustain that collective effort?
Oh, yeah, great question and tough question. I think sometimes, sadly, it is the disasters that we experience that are a wake-up call. I think Hurricane Ida was one in particular where we really saw the risk that extreme rainfall can have, and how some of the older infrastructure in the Northeast, particularly in New York and New Jersey, has not been built to withstand that kind of impact of rainfall over such a short period of time. And there was even another event.
Nobody really is, though, right?
Yeah,
When you think about it, I tell people that all the time. I say, we had a lot of flooding 3 years ago, September, and
Right.
if we ever had that amount of rainfall again, we'd have the same result.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't lie to the constituency.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so thinking about what are the things that you can do to alleviate some of that flooding in those places in the short term, and then long term thinking about how we expand that infrastructure to be able to actually live with that much water, because the projections are that maybe not Ida level amounts of flooding, but there is going to be higher expected rainfall across the region. And so how do we make sure that we're ready for that? Our infrastructure is ready for that. And there's small things that you can do, and there's big things that you can do. And so I think it's about moving the small things forward now and thinking about the big things.
Give us.
Yeah, totally. So in the short term, I think it's, using permeable pavement where possible, and when you're ripping up the streets, how can those streets be places that capture water? So thinking about existing upgrades that are happening, how can you add some form of resilience or adaptation to that in the now? Or even the tree planting you were talking about, or adding some green infrastructure. That's really helpful because it stores some of the water that would be going into the sewer system. And, as we know with Arthur Kill, there's combined sewer overflow. And so slowing down the rate of that water before it goes into the sewer system, that can also be really helpful until, we do the major sewer upgrades and retention ponds and tanks and all that kind of stuff.
So I know your region is New York and New Jersey. How do you think New Jersey stacks up against other states or even New York when it comes to climate policy? Yeah. Are you allowed to compare?
I am, and I'm happy to answer this question.
I didn't know you would be if you represent both states on this issue.
It's really good. I think New Jersey is extremely underrated and does not get the recognition that they deserve for being really forward-thinking in a lot of ways on climate. I think people tend to say California is leading the nation in climate change, New York is leading the nation in climate change, but New Jersey is up there. I would say it's one of the nationwide leaders in planning for climate change. There's a lot of really great coordination at the state level with New Jersey DEP. There's a lot of great work happening on the ground in communities across New Jersey. The impacts of climate change are really dire in New Jersey, I will say that, but there's a lot of good planning happening. There's a lot of good legislation passing. I'll give you one anecdotal experience. And we were working on the flood disclosure law in New York and the flood disclosure law in New Jersey at the same time. And in New York, it was extremely difficult to get that law passed. There was a lot of conflict and people having to educate people on what the law does. In New Jersey, it passed unanimously. It passed in one session. People were bought in. They realized it was a good law, and they got it done like that, and the governor signed it, and it's now went into effect. And so I think stuff like that really indicates...
Did it ever pass in New York?
It did pass in New York, but it took a lot. It took a lot, and it did pass. But we used the messaging. We said, look, New Jersey did this so quickly and so well. What are we doing over here in New York? And, I think there's a lot of cases of that where New Jersey's putting out forward-thinking rules and regulations for how to live with water and deserves a lot of credit.
So what role can normal, bad word, average folks, what can we do?
Yeah. Well, one, be aware of the risks, like I said before, make sure that you're not caught off guard when there's a storm or when there is an extreme heat wave, really being sure that you're prepared. I know sometimes we like to think that this is a problem that the city should fix, or this is a problem that the state should fix, but there's things that residents can do and be equipped to really push for those changes. But the one thing that I would say to people is to think about climate change as an opportunity. We think of it so often as a risk and it's all doom and gloom, but in some cases, the projections are not great, and so I understand that, but there's an opportunity to think kind of differently about what the future of our cities and our towns and our state looks like in a climate changed world. And so I would encourage people to really think creatively and boldly about the future that you want and make sure to advocate for those things when you're thinking about climate change.
So tomorrow it's going to be, people are going to watch this afterwards, but tomorrow it's going to be 99, 100 degrees. Now we've had hot weather before, but never as we had in the last 2 years where it's sustained at this level.
Yeah. And the humidity, yeah.
Yeah, what's that bit, it's okay, but it's hot heat or whatever. There's no humidity. It's still hot, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. So, how do you, correcting that is...
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough. And
you buy into that as technology that takes carbon out of the air?
I think we should explore everything and not leave any solution off the table. But I would, when people point to those big technological innovations, I think it's worth exploring them. But I think scientists and planners and folks have really had the solutions laid out for a long time. And I think it's maybe taking some of that community-led planning and some of the solutions that we know work, but might be costly or might take some, political will, and really moving those solutions forward as quickly as we can. The heat is a tough one. The Earth's atmosphere takes decades and decades to adapt and adjust, and so even the heat that we're experiencing now is not from the emissions that are being pumped out to the atmosphere this year or last year. It's really from decades before, and I know you know that. And so there's, but that's why I think action soon is really important, because it's going to take a while for things to rebound and correct themselves. And so, one thing that I think people tend to mix up is that it's too late, but it's not. It's not too late. All the science points to we have a rapidly closing window of opportunity to act, but a rapidly closing window is not closed. It's still open, and there's still opportunity to act. And so I think we should really take that as an opportunity to make big changes and do good things.
If the climate change folks could clone someone like you, maybe then we'd have a lot more activity around climate change, especially in dealing with getting an education and the message out there.
Yeah.
I mean, because you're really good at this and you understand
Oh,
it.
thank you.
And you speak well about it. So
Thank you.
I thank you for taking the time to join us on the show.
Well, thanks for
Any
having me.
closing comments?
No, just that, stay cool in this extreme heat. Be prepared, and make sure that you when you're advocating, you're thinking about how climate change affects all these other factors of your life. So, I just want to, last remarks is just thank you again for having me on. Thanks for all the great work that you're doing for the city of Elizabeth, and hope to be back with you soon.
I want to thank Mr. Tyler Taba, the Director of Resilience and the Waterfront Alliance, for all of his efforts and education and knowledge that he has shared with Elizabeth. And we'll see you next week on another edition of Our City.